I am science fiction.
Hi, I'm Mike Zipser with Fast Forward, and today we're going to talk about the Museum of Science Fiction. Joining me here in the studio is Mandy Sweeney, who is Vice President of Operations for the museum, and Jonathan Spencer, who is their General Counsel. Welcome to Fast Forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start with, last time we talked about the museum, we were talking about the preview museum that you wanted to do. What's going on with that?
Let's see. Well, I think where you left off with our executive director, Greg, we were just getting started with our plans for the Preview Museum. We've covered a ton of ground since then. We have plans for the museum. We have narrowed down our site for the Preview Museum down to 2 sites. We have a curatorial staff that is putting together our exhibit plans, and we've run a few contests where people have submitted designs and just helped us finalize, what we're going to do. We're really excited about it.
Yeah, that's very exciting because it sounds like it's like getting ready to be a real thing.
I would say imminent.
Imminent, yes, and you've got. It's exciting that you've got it down to 2 sites because the last time when I talked to Greg, it was, well, we're trying to figure out what we want to do. I don't suppose you can mention where those sites are.
I can't, but I can tell you some of the things that made it tricky for us to find, the slam dunk site. Science fiction has vehicles, big vehicles. And so in places like Virginia and DC that have a lot of historical buildings, you don't have a lot of latitude to tear down walls and make ceilings bigger or have bay doors so you can bring your giant shuttlecraft in, right? So those were the things that we would get somewhere, we'd say, oh, the location's great, it's very near a metro, this is perfect, people would love to come here, it'd be safe for kids to walk around on these streets. And then we'd say, darn, where are we gonna put the Stargate? It's, there's not enough space for us. And so those were the things that made it tricky.
But you've managed to find at least a couple of places that you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about the concept of the Preview Museum, because that's not something you hear about much. And my understanding is it's like a beta site.
It is like a beta site. And if you're in software, maybe you could call it a little bit of a sandbox. So we're going to be doing some things differently than many museums because our museum is really a palace to the future in some ways. And so we're not going to showcase science fiction in the same ways that a traditional museum might showcase, a dinosaur. And so we're going to try some things out. And before we finalize plans for our full museum, which will be about 40,000 square feet, we want a prototype site where we can test out some new interactive technologies, some different ways to exhibit, different ways to kind of draw people into an experience at a smaller scale. And we're going to change out our exhibits about every 9 months or so that we can get feedback on all of those exhibits and use the feedback from our visitors to refine before we create the full site.
Right, that was one of the things I was reading on your website is it's almost going to be, in a sense, crowdsourced.
Crowdsourced and a little experimental, but some of the ideas that are coming through from a number of our really talented volunteers are really exciting. And some things, we'll be building from scratch just so that we can put the technology in it, that people can interact. And some things, that are more artifacts will be coming to us as well that we're lining up. So we have a lot of good things in the hopper.
We want the museum to be very interactive, and we want a location and a spot that allow us not only to be interactive with our visitors, but with the community as a whole. A big part of the museum is about what is known as STEAM education, initiatives. We had science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And obviously science fiction being, literature and film and video game is an art. And bringing those in with the traditional STEM elements, we want it to be an educational location. So we want to be able to use both the outside and the inside of the museum to do events, to do programming, and to have that flexibility and be very interactive and also be part of the educational mission for the museum.
Right, and I've noticed that as part of the educational part, you've partnered with the DC Public Library, and you've done some things with them, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We've actually had several classes with one of the schools in the DC public system, and where we brought in authors, we brought in folks from NASA, where we have really got in with the students and used science fiction as a vehicle. And it's been very, we've had a writer from Star Trek: The Next Generation come in and talk about script writing with the class, and we've had folks from NASA come in and talk about spacecraft and really get the students excited.
And you're doing similar things with the Brooklyn Public Library system, I understand.
The Brooklyn Public Library was a place where we held a temporary exhibit to showcase some of the designs that were submitted through our architectural design contest. And so right now we don't have any explicit educational programming there like we have done with DC, but we did do the same exhibit on the architectural designs in Brooklyn and a special reception, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, we also did co-sponsor with them a seminar program there at the Brooklyn Library. This was again focused on what the author on Star Trek: The Next Generation came in and gave a program on that, looked at the episode and talked about the involvement of writing a science fiction episode. So that was also done. We did that with the DC Public Library, and we've also done it with the Brooklyn Library.
Oh, that'd be really cool to have the writer talk like that about what went on. Let's talk, you mentioned the architectural competition that you had. And there were a number of awards you gave, a Jules Verne Award, Arthur C. Clarke Award, things like that. And what I found fascinating with it is the winners were international.
We had such an amazing response to that contest. We thought about it. It was a great idea that we were at a baseball game with some neighbors talking about the designs and how we were going to try to get the designs, and they said, you should do a contest. And so we did, and we thought maybe we'll have 60 entries, and we ended up with over 400 entries, 60 of which were from international participants. 50% were from international participants, but from 60 different countries, which was just so much outside our expectation, so much above it. It was really incredible, and we had lined up an incredible panel to select and review the designs, and about 3 weeks into the contest, we were already 200% over the expected entries that we thought we would get, and we had to rally for some more reviewers because we were going to run out of capacity.
I think it's fair to say we were blown away both by the response and by the designs that were submitted. They really were quite amazing. Emily Yen, who was the winner, a Rhode Island School of Design student, and really came forward with something that was really very practical for the Museum of Science Fiction for our temporary facility, as well as something that really had flexibility and a great vision. And of course, we had tremendous other ones, some less practical, and others, far more some very imaginative, but certainly elements that we could incorporate into our future things, including the idea of a virtual museum.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and at least I think one of the awards was for like the imagination in the design. And these were designs for the whole museum, or?
These were for the preview space, which will be 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. Some of the designs that were really imaginative actually broke some laws of physics, and so we did want to recognize them for their beauty, but we couldn't make them happen, at least not on this planet and the gravity that we have here. So.
But who knows in the future?
Well, that's what the virtual museum's for. That makes all things possible.
Tell me a little bit about the idea of the virtual museum.
The virtual museum, it is this virtual space that will work in an Oculus Rift system. We have 3 gentlemen from NASA that are designing it now, and the purpose of the virtual museum is to create a virtual version of the preview museum that you can experience with your Oculus Rift set on. It'll have a NASA-inspired heliophysics center where you can check space weather and learn about how the sun and the heliosphere affect Earth and space travel, which is really neat, and some other elements that we plan to put in the preview museum.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, man. Sorry, it just blew my mind. Yeah, go ahead.
And I mean, one of the things about having a virtual museum, and Oculus Rift is the first environment we're going to work with because that's one that we can that's here and now today. But part of the thing about having the museum is to make it available not just to the visitor here in Washington, D.C. We'd like to make that obviously a big part, but to make it available across the country or even around the world. So having that virtual footprint is going to allow us to do that, to reach even more people.
Yeah, and I think the idea of the museum is to have it be an immersive experience in the museum, right? So,
And feel futuristic.
Yeah.
Not feel like you're in some dusty place that's been there for 300 years, but feel like you're kind of stepping through a portal to someplace new.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the concept art competition you had, which was for some of the different galleries. You can have different galleries in the museum, and you had a competition for, I think, some concept art for those.
Yes, we, similar to the architectural design contest, we also ran another contest for concept art and received lots of beautiful entries from that, all inspired by our galleries. And so our galleries, it's like naming the dwarves, so I'm always going to leave out one. And so, Jonathan, you'll have to fill in, time travel, artificial intelligence, other worlds. Creators, and that, creators is my favorite. That's where we celebrate, Roddenberry and Verne and the people who made science fiction happen.
That's cool. Yeah, I saw the list of the galleries, and it was like, yeah, it kind of covers, a good what you want in a museum of science fiction.
It was difficult to come to an organizing principle for science fiction because it's so broad. And so do you chop it up by franchise? Do you say this is the Star Wars section, this is the Star Trek section, this is the, Blade Runner section? Or do you separate it by different themes like time travel and artificial intelligence?
If you do it by the
stories that
franchises,
way,
you'll end up with angry fans of some other franchise that you left out.
And you'd have to change
storming
out
the building.
That's right. And you'd have to change out the galleries all the time because there's so many franchises to celebrate.
And then new franchises come along.
That's right. Plus, we celebrate all forms of media for science fiction, not
Right.
just TV and not just film, but comics and books and music and costuming and all of those things. So,
One of the other collaborations you did was with Jet Propulsion Laboratory with, I think it was concept art for a new idea of space travel, which is like hitchhiking on comets.
that was really neat and a little serendipitous. So I used to be a consultant to NASA, and one of the programs that I worked with was called NIAC, NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts Program. And there's a young scientist out at JPL named Hiro who was inspired by Hitchhiker's Guide to come up with this propulsion idea whereby he would shoot, or we, or scientists, or whoever's out there would shoot, harpoon essentially, a comet and use the comet to take the vehicle or the satellite or whatever it was outside the solar system. And so, when I met him and I saw his proposal actually at NASA, I talked with him about that and asked him what inspired him to do that. And so we made the connection with science fiction. And so we introduced him to some of the artists that work with us, and they were able to do some renderings for him.
Oh, that's cool.
It was really neat.
It looked like a really fascinating idea and a great concept for being able to get a vehicle out of the solar system, without having to spend too much fuel.
That's right.
And we've shown that you can harpoon a comet.
Yes, it's still a little experimental, but I think that all things are possible in the future, and it helps. I think it also helps NASA scientists to to visualize what they're doing, is, get beyond just a PowerPoint presentation, to have really stunning graphics that show, that bring it to life. I think that really helps them advocate for their work.
I don't think you'd find a single person at NASA, any scientist, who wouldn't say somehow some element of science fiction hasn't inspired them. And a big theme of the museum is about how imagination is the germ, is the foundation for reality. And we want the museum to show how our imagination in science fiction has created the reality we live in today and the reality we're going to live in the future. And so that's a big part of it. Is we've all been inspired by things we've watched in the science fiction films, whether it's the communicator from Star Trek, or the lightsabers or teleportation. I'd love to have a teleporter. Still waiting for my teleporter. I know some people are still waiting for their jetpack.
Yeah, the hell with the flying cars. I want the teleporter.
You want the teleporter, the jetpack, the hoverboard. I mean, these are all things that we've seen in the science fiction movies, and it's like, where is it? It should be here by now.
Before we finish, let me ask you something personal. What got you to, you're obviously science fiction fans, or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. What got you into science fiction?
You first, Jonathan.
What was your gateway drug for science
Your
fiction?
gateway drug, that's funny.
What was my gateway drug for science fiction? Well, I would admit it has to be the space program. I grew up in the 60s watching each of the lunar missions, and as each of the Apollo spacecraft took off, and as we got closer to the moon and we landing on the moon, that's definitely was the inspiration there. I saw this thing and I wanted to read more, and you start off with that. You pick up Ben Bova, you pick up all these great books about traveling in space, and just from there moved on.
And Mandy, what about you?
Gosh, well, sure, I loved Jetsons and things like that as a kid, and I did like a lot of science fiction, but I really didn't identify as a science fiction fan until I was an adult and I started working at NASA. And before I came to NASA, I did stand-up comedy for a little bit. And so I thought I was pretty darn funny. And I went to NASA, my jokes did not play there. And people would, make remarks about, oh, well, this is, if everybody was on the same page, they would say, oh, that's our Borg mentality, And I had no idea what they meant because I had never watched Star Trek. And so my colleagues at NASA put me on a regimen of science fiction. This is your starter science fiction. Start with Doctor Who, that's light. Then we're going to advance you to Neuromancer and things like that. So they put me on a path.
Because Neuromancer is pretty advanced.
And I fell in love.
So you came to it as an adult.
As an adult, yeah.
Oh, that's because most of the fans hit it, like when they were maybe 12, which is also known as the golden age of science fiction.
Well, I developed the self-awareness that I love science fiction as an adult, but as a child, absolutely loved it. Just didn't know that's what it was.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here, and it looks like the museum is in good hands and is moving ahead, and I for one, am very excited to see it going ahead, and I can't wait to see it. Thanks for being here.
Can't wait to welcome you there.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's it for this episode of Fast Forward. So from all of us here, there's Mike Zipser saying, take care.